You from Benin City, the Edo State capital. Now, something momentous happened in Benin yesterday. You must have been hearing about the Benin artifacts, which were, should I say, stolen, or should I say just carted away in the last century. That is almost 180 years ago. And we have heard about some of them being in places as far away as Boston, and museums in Chicago, and museums in London. Well, the important news is that some of them are beginning to actually find their way back to where they were taken from. We're going to be looking at that this morning, and our guests are His Royal Highness Prince Edun Akenzua, who is the Enogie of Obazua. Good morning, Prince.
Good morning.
Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
And we also have with us Dr. Adrian Mark Walker.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us on Sunrise. You might be wondering what Dr. Walker has to do with all of this. He is the grandson of the Colonel or Captain Walker,
Yes.
in whose, well, he found something in his father's collection which he thought didn't belong there. Now, let me start with you, Dr. Walker. Please tell us the story yourself.
My grandfather was a young captain when he came to Benin as part of the 1897 so-called punitive expedition following the death of a party of British officers and carriers earlier in 1897. The punitive expedition, as most people will know, destroyed Benin that year, and they found in the city very many bronzes and ivory artifacts. Most of those were taken by the Admiralty to defray the costs of the expedition and sold. That's how they found their way to museums all over the world, as you pointed out. Some were allowed to be kept by the officers, and it's those objects that I remember seeing in my grandmother's house and being told they were from Benin. Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
Go on.
Yes. What really excited my interest, though, was a diary that my grandfather had kept, a contemporaneous diary describing every day of the action from the time of his departure from Liverpool by ship to his arrival back home again. I was impressed by the diary, and so I have, in addition to bringing the bronzes back, I brought the diary back because I think it would give historical context to the temporary loss of
When
these
you read
artifacts.
the diary, sorry to interject, when you read the diary, what did you find there? What kind of stories were being told?
I was expecting to find evidence of the kind of casual racism that was widespread in England at that time. But I was very proud to find that my grandfather appeared to be ahead of his time. And this may have something to do with the fact that he was born and brought up in India and living among a multicultural society already. So he had no difficulty in regarding the enemy as enemy in sense of human beings rather than enemy in any other sense. And he was also a man that clearly had respect for human life. He managed to save the lives of two people who were non-combatants who were about to be shot by Marines. And he records all this in his diary. He also records forcibly capturing a Benin villager, or at least a villager from the surrounding village, in order to get him to show him the way when they were pursuing the Oba of Benin, and remarks that he found it very difficult to make the man understand that he was not going to be killed and not going to be sold into slavery, but simply returned to his home village when he'd completed the mission,
Exile.
which was to show him the way.
Okay. Now, what made you decide to return these things? They've been away for 170 years or so. So why did you decide to bring them back to Nigeria?
Well, I'm as good a materialist as any other man, and I've certainly coveted those items since becoming aware of the fact that eventually one of my parents' children would inherit them. And I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, so there's a certain amount of competition going on. I suppose I might have kind of outflanked them by persuading my mother to part with them before she died, but I knew that I couldn't do anything with them at that stage because she would have been horrified at the thought of losing them from the family. When she did die last year, I should have been pleased to be the owner of these artifacts. But to my surprise, I found myself asking, well, although they'd be nice for me to have until I die, what then? My children, my grandchildren, to them they're just pieces of bronze. What better way of ensuring that they are properly looked after, I thought, than by returning them to
their owners.
Nigeria.
Okay, thank you. And now, Prince, the return of these precious pieces, when the news got to you that they were coming back, what were your thoughts?
Well, I was elated, I was happy. I passed on the information to the Oba here, say these things were coming. And of course, we've all been pleading, using all the diplomatic resources we had to get this thing brought back. Now, the 2 that have come now have come from the private owner, the private people, as Adrian. The bulk of it all you have in the museums, British Museum, the museum in Germany, in America, in Austria, all over the world. And I must say at this point that after the fight in 1897, that fight that was provoked by the British administrators here, they didn't just tumble on those items, those precious items. Because in 1896, before the battle, Philip, who was the vice consul of the British government at the time, Niger Coast Protectorate in this area, that was where Philip was, he had written a letter to the British Home Office telling them they had to come here and depose the Oba then, my great-grandfather, that's Oba Vonrabe, and that in order to make a case for the permission he was looking for, he told them in that letter, a copy of which is available now, that he knew that there would be enough ivory and bronze works in the palace, the value of which would compensate for the cost of deposing the Oba. Now that's what they did. So after the battle, they deliberately looked for those things Philip referred to. And gleefully they sat down in the palace ground, cataloguing them all, carrying them away. And luckily, from the diary Adrian brought now, going through them, I saw his grandfather's entry, where they assembled all those bronzes and ivories and so on. They wrote loot.
Oh dear.
That's what they wrote at the
He
bottom.
himself described it as loot.
At that time, he described it as loot. And there was a second photograph of the same thing, and he simply wrote more loot. So
That's
he,
incriminating, isn't it?
so his grandfather knew exactly this loot. And that's what happened. But we were quite excited that a descendant of that Katla, who took them
Decided.
away at that time, without any prompting on his own, decided to bring those things back.
Now, Prince, there have been discussions that we have heard of between Nigeria and those other countries, especially Britain, about the ones that are now in the British Museum. How far gone are those discussions, and do we have any hope of those coming back? Because there seem to be quite a lot of them.
Yeah, we have quite a lot there. Unfortunately, or it will surprise you to know that what they have in Britain is not as much as what they have elsewhere. They have quite a
How
bit.
so? It was the British that came here.
They were the ones that came here. They took them all away, and I think when they got to Liverpool, they were trying to defray the cost of the invasion, and they put them on auction. So people who were interested from wherever went there and bought them. So you have a lot in America, a lot in Austria, in Germany, and all those places.
Well, one of the things that quite a few Nigerians, and especially those in diaspora, keep saying is when this issue of the looted artifacts come up, and they see what has been done to some of them in the British Museum, how they've kept them and they keep cleaning them and making sure they're in sparkling, wonderful shape and form, they then ask the question, what are we doing with the ones back home? What are we doing with the artifacts we have in the King's Palace, whether it's here in Benin or in Ife or in Ibadan or other places? What are we doing with them?
Well, I think I'll say this. When those things were created here, they were not created for the museum, for any museum. They were not artifacts. See, those things were our own diary, as it were. Because whenever anything happened, anything important happened in Benin, the Oba would tell the Guild of Bronze Casters to cast it into bronze. So as other people were keeping diaries,